On your Tuesday episode of Locked On Raptors, All-Star is in the books, the stretch run is upon us, and there's a whole lot of interesting stuff to keep tabs on with this Raptors team.
You are Locked On Raptors, your daily Toronto Raptors podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, what's going on? And welcome to another episode of Locked On Raptors, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It is Tuesday, February the 17th, and I'm your host, Sean Woodley. I've been covering the Raptors for 12 seasons on various platforms. You can find all my work over on Blue Sky. You can find the show on Instagram. You can join us in the Locked On Raptors Discord server, link in the description of the podcast. 100% free to join, as always. And today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. Use your profit boost on an NBA future and get entered for your chance to win a trip to the NBA Finals. Play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. And we're off and running here with Joe Wolfond, back from a lovely California vacation, not taking in All-Star, because why would you go to LA to do that? He's here, and we're going to dig into the most interesting things we're keeping an eye on with your Toronto Raptors over the remainder of the season and the push to the playoffs. But Wolfond, first I have to ask you, did you watch a single second of All-Star Weekend? Do you have takes on the All-Star game being saved?
I gotta say, okay, so I'm on record. I've talked about this on my now defunct podcast, Pound the Rock. I have never in my entire life watched an All-Star game start to finish.
Kudos to you, my friend.
I'm not, wearing that as a badge of honor or anything. I just have never found them particularly compelling. Mm-hmm. And so with all the discourse surrounding the All-Star game in the last few years and how bad it's gotten, like how nobody tries, I'm like, that's always been the case in my opinion. So it's just never been especially interesting for me. And I have to say, I did tune in for a decent portion of the actual All-Star mini tournament or whatever you want to call it. Mm-hmm. I gotta say, I think that format is way more conducive to actual entertaining basketball. Mm-hmm. I think it's also a little bit like, okay, what exactly am I watching and why do I care about this? Like with the old All-Star format, I think there was at least something to be said for the team I root for plays in the Eastern Conference, so
right. Down with
let's root for the East to win. Yeah. There's some kind of compelling us versus them aspect to it, and you understand what the matchup is, what the stakes are, who you're rooting for. And in this, it's just okay, there is the U.S. versus the world thing. Mm-hmm. Not that, I have a particular rooting interest in that clash or rivalry. I mean, I guess I do as a Canadian, but there's two U.S. teams, and it seems just pretty random how those teams are made up. So I think that aspect of it is just kind of odd, I guess. But also the basketball itself was pretty good. Seemed like guys were trying at least harder than they have in previous years. And I think more importantly, I think an easy fix to the All-Star game would just be have a target score. You could do East versus West, have a target score and play up to 100. Mm-hmm. And then it's maybe there would be some parts of the game where the effort wasn't super high, but as you're starting to approach that target score, I think you would see that. You would see guys trying and really digging in. And I think that's what this format gets right, is it's just you're playing one quarter, mm-hmm. and I think that's just more conducive to playing with a certain level of intensity, where, it's I think people have pointed out, it's the fourth quarter of the All-Star game is often pretty decent, and you're basically just making all of these a bunch of mini fourth quarters. So
yeah, oops, all fourth quarters. How could you go wrong?
Yeah. But I think if you were just to go back to straight East versus West and have a target score, I think I'd be way more likely to tune in for an entire game of it.
Yeah. I watched only a scant few minutes of All-Star Sunday, but I will say the one big takeaway I have, and this has been one of my sort of deeply held beliefs for a while now, that NBA overtime is the single worst part of NBA basketball. It's always a letdown and it stinks. A target score in overtime, it turns out pretty awesome. Scotty Barnes hits the three to put them over the target score in that first overtime. It's great. Just play to 11. That should be what overtime is. And I can't believe it's never been even tabled, because 5-minute overtime is lame. All right, Joe, we got other stuff to get into today, including, the Toronto Raptors and their impending stretch run to the postseason, hoping to hang into a top 6 seed. Seem like they're in pretty good shape to do that, but they've had some issues of late. Their offense has been flagging for a couple of months now. We'll see about the sort of validity of the defense. We're going to get into all that today. And yeah, we just came up with a handful of things we're keeping tabs on, and we'll just try to hammer out as many as we possibly can. If we don't get to all of them, hey, there's plenty more days left this week that I can dive into some of this stuff. But Joe, I want to start here. The sort of thing I am most keenly interested in is whether or not the Raptors can find their level on offense again. Like, just not even the full, like, they're a top 5 offense that we saw in the first month or so of the season, but can they find some semblance of that form on the offensive end, in the half court in particular, after a couple of months here of just kind of being so to bad? They had a really bad 3-point shooting slump between like mid-December and mid-January. They seem to have busted out of that a little bit, but still not a terribly high volume 3-point shooting team. Half court wise, they were 26th between December the 1st and January 15th in half court offense. It's rebounded a little bit. They're 18th in overall offense, 16th in half court offense since January 15th. So it's not terrible. They were as high as 6th in half court offense, of course, in the first month plus of the year. RJ Barrett goes down. Jakob Poeltl goes down. Those guys were obviously very important to what they were doing in their half court offense. Do you have any hope here, Joe, that the offense can figure out something approaching top 10-ish form to give them enough firepower against the very highly powered offenses like the Knicks, the Celtics, the Cavs that they've had a lot of trouble with over the course of the season? Obviously, they're 3-0 against the Cavs, but they're a very different team now, and I think they are very much one of those 4 contenders in the Eastern Conference at this point. So, it feels like it's been an issue, and I'm hopeful they can turn it around. What level of hope do you have that they can at least approach something closer to the early season level?
Not a ton. No, not a ton. Like, yeah. I think the where they've settled, like, coming out of the All-Star break, like you mentioned, they're 18th in overall offense. I think cleaning the glass has them at 13th in first shot half-court offense, which, yeah. That's pretty good. Like, that's better than I probably would have expected coming into the season, to be honest. And so you kind of have that amazing start that they had, which was in part powered by unsustainable shooting. Like, they were one of the best. The volume wasn't super high, but in terms of accuracy, they were one of the best 3-point shooting teams in the league for that first, month or so. And also you had Brandon Ingram shooting like 60% from mid-range. Yeah. There was an aspect of that always felt a little bit unsustainable. And I also think there's something to the fact that, they have these limitations, which I've talked about and I've written about, where, they just don't have a lot of off-the-dribble creation. They don't have a lot of shooting. And so the things that they rely on to create efficient half-court offense is like really demands a high level of execution and precision when it comes to like passing and cutting, right? Like that's how they create efficient shots in the half court. And I think I've been really impressed with their ability to like actually sustain that level of execution, but also teams get used to that. Teams are able to scout that. I think teams have like, one thing in particular, this is just like one thing of many, I feel like, but one that's really jumped out to me is the way that teams have started to like play them for the pass when guys are driving, like especially guys like Shed and Quickly, where, they sort of know that these guys aren't looking necessarily to like drive all the way to the rim and shoot there. And so there's been like a lot of skip passes that have gotten picked off. Like their turnover rate really spiked in the last few weeks before the break. So I think things like that are just sort of inevitable when you have the kind of limitations that they do offensively. And this is why I was really like banging the drum for them to try and go out and get like a dynamic guard at the deadline. And I don't think it's the end of the world that they didn't, because like I've said, I think this is kind of a low stakes season where they don't necessarily need to be chasing anything, shelling out draft capital. But I would have loved to have seen them go and get like a guy like Ayo Dosunmu. I've said that a few times before because he brings those kind of elements that they lack in terms of like the north-south, like the off-the-dribble creation and the shooting. And they're sort of deficient in all of those areas, and it creates all these cascading effects where I honestly think they've settled at around what I think their talent level is offensively. So top 10 to me feels like a bit fanciful.
Yeah, I mean, the thing I think that's really important here for the half court offense is just like getting the execution that you talked about to a level that you can kind of count on, that gives them just enough to scrape by when their ability to transition spam kind of goes away in the playoffs, right? Like, I'm sure they will still do all they can to run as much as they can off of misses like they usually do when you get to the postseason, but it's just harder to do that. The game slows down. Teams are more sort of schooled in getting back and all that stuff. And like, they just have to be able to scrape out enough, because I do think their defense is quite good. And we'll get into whether the defense can hold up at the level it has in a second here. But like, this doesn't have to be a top 5 offense for them to find themselves, in game 6 or game 5 of a 2-2 first round series and with a chance to move on. Like, they are good enough defensively. Scotty Barnes is enough of a game changer on that end. They have enough different types of looks they can throw out. Another thing we'll talk about a little bit later on, that I think they can navigate a playoff series through their defense kind of being the leading thing for them, but there just has to be a baseline level of competence. So look, I think having Poeltl back helps. It makes them a little bit more of a dangerous pick and roll team. Quickly gets to kind of do that thing, sort of getting to floater range, snaking around. Like, he just hasn't been able to do that to the same degree with Poeltl out of the lineup. RJ Barrett being back, obviously getting hopefully up to steam. Like, he's a good release valve for, Scotty, for Ingram, for those guys who, like you said, are kind of driving to pass. There's stuff here that, like, it's not a surprise to me that without those two guys in the lineup consistently, they fell off. And the numbers suggest that when both those guys are in there, they're pretty good offensively. The starting lineup has been very good offensively. But yeah, they're always going to be fighting uphill until they have a little bit more dynamic guard creation. It's just a matter of kind of making it work on the margins. And I do think there is, if they were the 5th best half court offense in the first half of the year, and they were 26th in the middle part of the year, and they've been, 16th over the last little bit, like, can they net out as they've been the 13th best half court offense, just kind of without those extremes pulling them each way? That would be delightful, and I think would be enough to kind of carry that defense through. We'll talk about the defense here in a sec here, Joe, and whether or not it can hold up as it has all season long. We'll dive into that coming up in just one sec. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel, and right now, the NBA Finals, they are only a few months away, and if you've ever wanted to experience the NBA Finals in person, FanDuel is giving you the chance to turn that dream into reality with their NBA sweepstakes. Here's how it works. Use your profit boost on any NBA future, and you'll automatically be entered for a shot to win an NBA Finals trip for 2. That's right. Flights, tickets, the whole experience. If you're already looking at the board and thinking about which team can make a deep run this year, this is the perfect time to lock it in. Futures are always fun. They're kind of, whenever I do get into sports wagering, it's usually just like a long-term futures gut feel that I have. Maybe it's an MVP vote. Maybe it's someone who I think is going to win, 6th man of the year, whatever it might be. You can make those futures bets right now, and it adds the extra layer of excitement down the stretch that, hey, you might be going to the NBA Finals if you've done this on FanDuel. And now not only can your pick cash, but can also send you to those finals. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Use your profit boost on an NBA future and get entered for your chance to win a trip to the NBA Finals. Play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Back at it here with Joe Wolfond. Just a quick reminder that the Locked On Raptors Everydayer Club is open for you to sign up. $5 a month, $50 for the year gets you ad-free episodes of the show every single day, plus access to our Locked On network-wide Discord with Locked On listeners from across the network and across the globe for you to go talk sports with on a place that's not the Hell website. Come hang out. It's a great place. Link in the description of the podcast. $5 a month, $50 for the year. Join the Everydayer Club. Okay, Joe. Your first thing you're keeping tabs on down the stretch is the defense. Tell me why.
I mean, basically because it's been way better than I expected it to be, and I'm curious to know if they can sustain that. Obviously, they've got this really tough schedule for the rest of the season, right? I think it's rates is like maybe the toughest in the Eastern Conference in terms of who they have left on the slate. And we know that they haven't performed especially well against like the top teams in the league. They've done really well against sort of like the middle class and like the lower rung teams, but against like, I think it's like teams with 60% winning percentage or better. They're like 1-10 or something like that. And they've struggled on both sides of the ball in those matchups. So with this tough schedule coming out of the break, I am very curious to see like to what level they can sustain a defense. It's basically been elite since late November. They got off to a really rough start on the defensive end, and were down in like the bottom 5 after the first couple of weeks, and then they had this amazing surge, and they got all the way up to like top 5, and then they've like hovered around top 5 ever since then. They're 6th right now in defensive efficiency. And this is despite, you look at the roster, and it's like you have Scotty Barnes, who is an all-world, just planet-eating defender who I think, should very much be in the conversation for Defensive Player of the Year. And then, Collin Murray-Boyles, as a rookie, absolute phenom, providing support. And then it's like a bunch of guys who, at least reputationally, are average to below average defenders, And like, I mean, maybe that's not entirely fair to a guy like Jakob Poeltl or Jamal Shed, but those are bench players. I think there are some guys who I think have been punching above their weight. I just actually, I put out a piece this morning about Brandon Ingram, who I think has been really, really good defensively for the last couple of months.
Yeah.
And that's been a kind of a shift for him. Like he's shown flashes in previous seasons of being an impact defender, but like with nowhere near the consistency or even honestly like the level of 3-level impact that I feel like he's shown over the last couple months with the Raptors. So that to me is just like health maybe first and foremost, but also effort and buy-in, because he's been like really disruptive, kind of all over the place, making like deflections, keeping his hands high, making low man rotations, like doing all that stuff. So if he's actually that guy, then I think that changes the calculus a bit on like where the water level should be expected to be for, the Raptors, just in terms of like pure defensive talent.
Sure.
And then maybe it doesn't feel like they're playing above their heads on that end of the floor. But it's interesting to me because I know we talked early in the season when the defense had really started to improve, and I was still very skeptical of it because I'm like, I'm still seeing these defensive breakdowns. Their defensive shot profile is still kind of a big red flag in terms of, the types of shots they're giving up. And I was just sort of skeptical that they could actually maintain that. And then I think the process really started to improve in terms of the way they were communicating, the way they were rotating, the way they were sort of forcing opposing offenses to work really deep into the clock. And they managed to do all that. Basically, it's been like almost 80% of their minutes this season that they have played without a traditional center on the floor. Yeah. And despite that, they're like basically league average in terms of rim protection, league average in terms of defensive rebounding. Like they have held their own in all the areas that you would have expected them to really struggle without a traditional 5. Mm-hmm. And so now you add Jakob Poeltl back into the mix, and you hopefully see that effort and impact carry over from Ingram into the second half. And even guys like, like Quickly and Grady Dick, who have these limitations, but who still really compete at that end of the floor. Mm-hmm. And when they, maybe like get beat, they stay in the play, they peel switch. I think things have actually like on a team level really been cohesive and connected and on a string. And then you have Scotty just like holding it all together. So yeah, how much of that can they maintain in the second half? I mean, that's really going to be the sort of make or break thing to me, because in my mind, I don't think that offense has like a ton of upward mobility. So if the defense falls off, then it could be a really tough last third of the season for them. But if they maintain it, then they could continue, competing for a top 4 seed.
Yeah. And I think we saw in that first game back for Poeltl, the pick and roll defense, not exactly, we're not going to put that one in the record books for best pick and roll defensive games ever played by a Toronto Raptors big man. Let's just put it that way. It was pretty rough stuff. And look, you'd expect that against probably the best pick and roll operator in the league right now in Cade Cunningham. And, his first game back after missing 24, whatever games it was, give him some time to find his sea legs there. But I do think it's interesting to sort of think about how much of their success has come from them being able to play small so effectively, and having Collin Murray-Boyles and Scotty Barnes on the floor together, and the sort of power that comes from those two dudes being able to cover for one another, switch. Poeltl's a good defensive center. I don't think he's got the same upside necessarily as that Murray-Boyles-Barnes duo does, and sort of the flexibility you can play with those guys. But, he should be better than what he was in that first game back. And I'm curious how they kind of, and we'll get into this in a little bit, how they kind of mix and match all these big man combinations to really kind of help the defense sing. And, I think we'll find a lot out about, just sort of how much of their power has come from those small configurations and, whether they can kind of find their best level with Poeltl on the floor. Cause it's not like the defense was incredible when Poeltl was healthy either, right? Like it
was way
really
worse.
struggled.
That's kind of like the dirty secret of this season is like when Poeltl was healthy, he was helping them way more offensively than he was defensively.
Totally.
Like the
Same
defense
was the case in that Pistons game too. They scored like gangbusters when he was on the floor and couldn't get a point when he was off. So,
and that's I didn't have this as like one of my things to watch, but it is really like, watching that Pistons game. I was like shuddering to think of what that would have looked like if Duren and Isaiah Stewart had been healthy for that game, right? Because Paul Reed looked like prime Wilt Chamberlain in that game, and Yak looked like probably what present day Wilt Chamberlain would look like if you exhumed him and put him on a basketball court. Like if that is the sort of level of defensive impact that you can expect from Yak going forward, then I don't know what kind of role you'd even want him to have on this team in this finishing stretch, because I think they defensively for sure have looked way better playing small.
Yeah. Well, let's get into this. We'll come back and we'll get into the ample options Darko Rajaković has to play with at his front court spots and whether or not those combinations are going to be able to kind of be optimized based on the skill sets involved with the various dudes. We'll come back with that coming up in just 1 second as we talk about our most interesting things to watch in the stretch run. Today's show is brought to you by Indeed. Workplace chaos, deadlines stacking up, inbox overflowing, and the one position you have to fill is still sitting open. That's when the pressure's on, and you got to find the right hire. This is a job for sponsored jobs. Indeed Sponsored Jobs helps you reach the people who actually fit what you're looking for, skills, experience, location, so you're not just hoping the right candidate stumbles across your post. It's putting them right in front of those people so you can attract the best candidates. And here's a stat that says it all. In the minute I'll be talking to you during this ad read, companies like yours will make 27 hires on Indeed, according to Indeed data worldwide. So if you're hiring, spend less time searching and more time interviewing candidates who check all the boxes you need filled with Indeed Sponsored Jobs. It's a lovely thing, and listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to help get that job the premium status it deserves at Indeed.com/podcast. Just go to Indeed.com/podcast right now and support this show by saying that you heard about us on this show and heard about Indeed, on this show. Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? This is a job for Indeed Sponsored Jobs. Go check it out. Today's show is also brought to you by TurboTax. I hate doing my taxes. I'm procrastinating it really bad this year because it's never something I enjoy doing, especially as a freelancer who has a weird job. It's very unpleasant, and I have a lot of forms I got to fill out, and I like to just not do it. And that is why I'm really going to strongly consider handing it off this year to a TurboTax full-service local expert. With TurboTax Full Service, you can have your taxes done for you by a trusted local expert start to finish without the stress or the guesswork. Instead of spending hours trying to figure out forms, you can meet with a local TurboTax expert in person or connect online. They handle everything from W-2s to self-employment forms, and they work to get you every single deduction. You can upload your documents, go about your day, and get updates right in the TurboTax app as you go. It's a huge time saver, and for someone who hates doing life admin like me, it's a wonderful game changer. For a limited time, you can have your taxes done by a local TurboTax expert for $150 all in. That's if a TurboTax expert didn't file for you last year, just be sure to file by February the 28th. That's coming up. So go do that right now. Take taxes off your plate and get back to your life. Visit TurboTax.com/local to book your appointment today. Back at it here with Wolfond, digging into the things we're keeping tabs on as the season winds down for your Toronto Raptors. 27 games left on the schedule, basically a third of the season left exactly. And just to go back to your earlier point, Joe, about the strength of schedule, less daunting than I thought as well. They currently, per Tankathon, have the 13th hardest remaining schedule in the league, 7th hardest in the Eastern Conference. They play a lot of good teams, but they also play a lot of very bad teams. They have like 12 remaining games against tanker-ass teams and then a bunch of games against good teams. Their days of playing the middle class largely behind them until they have the Heat, I think, twice in the last week of the year. Let's dive in here, Joe. to the front court options now at Darko Rajakovic's disposal with a healthy Jakob Poeltl. I think this, for me, just like tactically speaking, we talked about the big picture of the offense and defense, but on court tactics, in-game adjustments, the thing I'm most interested to watch is how does Darko deploy all these front court options he has down the stretch, because we've seen them obviously succeed playing small with Scotty Barnes plus Collin Murray-Boyles. We've also seen them play like super small with Brandon Ingram as the nominal 4 next to Scotty as the 5. Obviously, Mamu has been fantastic. Jakob Poeltl comes back in. He's been good with the starting lineup this year. It's been tougher to find other looks that have really worked there. I feel like we talked about it, like this team maybe has higher upside when they're rolling small with Collin Murray-Boyles and Scotty Barnes. Maybe they just got to figure out some looks that work with Poeltl to find that upside with other looks. But I'm curious how much they kind of blend these guys together and how much they lean into what I think is the strength of this team, Joe, which is they got a lot of good front court players and a lot of interesting skill sets to kind of mesh. Will we see them at all kind of eschew shooting entirely and go with the jumbo Scotty, Collin Murray-Boyles, Poeltl front court? Kind of say, you know what, we might not score it all, but no one's going to score on us and we're going to get every single rebound. Do they go with the Scotty, CMB, Mamu trio, which we've only seen for about 86 possessions this season? How much do we see Mamu play with Jakob Poeltl? They've played 8 possessions together all year long. And there's a lot of untapped and sort of unexplored combinations with this front court because of the amount of time Poeltl has missed. And I'm very curious to see just how it all comes together. What do you make of all this, Joe, as far as the front court mixing and matching we could see down the stretch?
This is really interesting to me because it hints at maybe a long-term question, a team-building question that the team is going to have to deal with. And they don't have to deal with it immediately. Again, Collin Murray-Boyles is a rookie. It's not like they have to figure out right now what kind of player he's going to be and start building around his skill set and like the idea of like a Scotty and CMB nucleus, like what does the team around them optimally look like? It's not, they don't have to answer those questions right away, but
time, yeah.
I do think it's interesting, like to ponder, like, can he succeed offensively as like a non-center? Because look, there's been 11 minutes where he and Scotty and Yak have all played together this year, so I don't think there's anything to take away from that sample, but it's been like pretty bad, 76 offensive rating. And I just think that sort of matches what you would expect based on like watching all those guys play and their different skill sets and
sure.
CMB, being an inside the arc kind of player and also having this, aversion to trying to finish around the rim. And just the spacing concerns that you would inevitably run into, I think, with all 3 of those guys on the floor. And it just, I'm curious to see kind of what that looks like. Again, it's like Mamu is another question, right? Like, ideally, defensively, you don't necessarily want him to be your center. Like as a last line of defense, as a rim protector, even as a rebounder, he's not been especially effective. But my God, does the offense sing when he's playing the 5. And when he's at the 4, it's much less effective. Like the skills that he brings to the table don't play up as much when he's playing the 4. His ability to stretch the floor and like make, kind of decisions on the move, keep the ball moving, like the fluidity that he brings to the offense is like so much more valuable when he's matched up against an opposing center and they have to deal with him in space. So I think these are all like very important questions that the Raptors are going to, hopefully find some answers to in the second half, because, the best teams to me are the ones that, like, obviously there's the ability to mix and match, right? You want to have lineup versatility and play certain lineups to fit certain situations. That's really important. But the best teams are also the ones who can kind of have their best offensive lineups and their best defensive lineups kind of like match up, like be one and the same, or at least have a lot of overlap in the Venn diagram. And I don't know if the Raptors have that, like I think that's something that they're going to have to figure out and reckon with is like, can you find a balance, like a happy medium between your best defensive and offensive lineups? And I think that really speaks to the front court question that you're asking is like, what is the best combination there to make all of this work at both ends of the floor simultaneously?
Yeah, I think a lineup I need to see a lot down the stretch, Joe, is quickly Ingram, Barnes, CMB, Mamu. I really think that Yeah, you're kind of moving one of Mamu or CMB sort of out of the nominal 5 position in that configuration to your previous point. But like, I think there's enough shooting there. I think there's enough that you can kind of, maybe CMB is sort of your nominal center on offense, and maybe he's your center on defense too. And maybe the sort of spacing of Mamu makes more sense playing with those sort of 2 defensive, springy, sort of interior focus guys in Scotty and CMB. Like, that's just, we've seen very little of that look, and I think that might be the closest they can get to sort of best version of offense, best version of defense. It'd be great if Jakob Poeltl were involved in some of these lineups, considering they're heavily invested in him going forward. But and I do think their starting lineup has been quite good, right? Like, the numbers paint a pretty good picture, offensively in particular, defensively less so. But I think there's probably more to get out of that with a Jakob Poeltl who's moving properly, and this version of Brandon Ingram on defense, which his sort of peak defensively hasn't quite overlapped with Poeltl's full health this year. And so obviously it's a lineup we're going to see a lot down the stretch, one would think. And is that just the easy answer to this question? Is yeah, like that's their best offensive and defensive lineup, and everything else kind of fills in behind that. Like, that'd be very easy and great and nice, but I'm not sure that's totally going to be the case based on what we've seen so far this year. It's just it's fun to have all these different looks to play around with. But to your other point, like, I think the best teams in the playoffs know who they are and know what their sort of core base lineups are. And I don't know if we quite know if the Raptors have figured that out just yet. And that's going to be, it's a great testing ground, some good opponents down the stretch to test this stuff out against. And hopefully you can kind of win enough games along the way to hold on to that 6th seed at the very least, and, be in the playoffs and avoid the play-in. But I'm fascinated to see how it all kind of comes together. It's nice to have options. Like, it really is. It's, how they piece them all together that I think is a really open question still. Any last quick things here, Joe? We only got a couple minutes left, but any quick hitters, things you're keeping an eye on down the stretch?
So yeah, 2 quick things. One is just like, can Grady Dick remember how to shoot? Because
that'd be great.
I think that would be like actually a sneaky big swing factor. Maybe not sneaky, like it would just be a big swing factor for this team, because he's actually really improved in a lot of areas. And unfortunately, like, the most important thing for him to be able to do has like completely cratered. Mm-hmm. And so the stuff that he's improved at, like, the way that he, like, I still think he's a negative defender probably overall, but like really like giving 110% effort at that end of the floor, like flying all over the place, getting deflections, finding a way to like make his presence felt, and then like finishing at the rim, which was a huge challenge for him in his first couple seasons, is like, he's up over 70% at the rim this season. Mm-hmm. And like, that's up from like 53% last year, and like somehow his effective field goal percentage has still gone down. Yeah. because of how hard his shooting has fallen off. So like, just getting him back to being like a 38% 3-point shooter would have, I think, huge positive effects for this team, and all the stuff we're talking about with like the offense. Like, can they find their level again? Mm-hmm. God, would that be a big factor? Because right now it's like they have one movement shooter. Yeah. And that's, Emmanuel Quickley, who's like kind of not had the best shooting season himself by his standards. So like adding Grady into that mix and doubling your movement shooting quotient, I think would be a big thing.
No doubt, man. He's shooting 24% on above the break threes this year. Like
come on.
Sense. Yeah, like 37% last year, 31% as a rookie. They're going in from the corners. That's good. 42% from the corners. You'll take that. But like, the above the break stuff is the stuff that's going to really sort of peel the cap off this thing. And they're just not going in. And they have to go in because, like you said, he's improved at basically all of the other things except for the thing that he's supposed to be good at. And that actually kind of limits his utility as a player because it's such an important piece of the things he's supposed to bring to the table.
Right. And like the corner threes, those are like the standstill threes, right? Like you want him to be able to hit those above the break threes. Those are the ones that like come off of movement. Totally. And they can really make the Raptors sets a lot more dynamic when you can put a guy in motion and have him be a threat coming off a pin down, coming off a flare screen and being able to shoot on the move. Like that's what he's supposed to be able to do. Yeah. But he's really only hitting like the threes of the standstill variety right now.
Yeah. I mean, for me, like Grady plus Jacoby, like can one of those dudes just like consistently give them those off the bench 2-guard minutes that they've been sorely lacking on a sort of regular basis throughout the year? I mean, this is a team that's greater than the sum of its parts. It's kind of how it's designed. And like, if you only have 7 guys a night you can count on, you can't really tap into that sort of ethos for the team. And if you can have one of those guys just be there nightly, knowing you're going to get exactly what you're going to get, that would be so helpful and nice and refreshing, because it's been a roller coaster for that position all season long. Joe, we're going to leave it there. Anything you want to promote for the good people out there?
I'm writing at Raptors in 7. Joining Vivek over there, our Substack, covering the Raptors, for the rest of the season, and that's all I got right now.
Hell yeah, brother. For you out there, the listener, follow, subscribe, rate, review, tell a friend. Always appreciate it when you support the show, however it is you choose to support the show, but do it in some way, shape, or form, please. You can also join the Everydayer Club. $5 a month, $50 for the year gets you ad-free episodes of the show, plus a great many other perks. We'd love to see some more signups over there. It helps me out big time, and you don't get those ads. You just get me uninterrupted and my guests uninterrupted. It's a lovely thing, and we'll be back again on Wednesday as we continue to look ahead to the stretch run for the Toronto Raptors. They're back in action on Thursday against the Bulls as well. We got some stuff on deck for that, and yeah, we'll talk to you very soon. Thanks so much for hanging. Bye-bye.